Chuck Palahniuk is a really tough writer to love. He comes up with some exceedingly strange situations. He talks about some pretty taboo things occasionally. It's really uncomfortable stuff. He's not afraid to really get into the muck and the mire, which has the benefit of bringing up some interesting philosophical trains of thought. On the other hand, you're stuck reading a Chuck book, so it's a 50-50 shot as to whether or not it's going to actually be enjoyable. Entertaining? Usually. Enjoyable? Not always. None of his books are particularly long, but Lullaby is pretty mid-range here. It comes in at 260 pages hardback, which is approximately 79,500 words. Now, the book falls pretty firmly in the satire category, like almost everything else Chuck has written. However, you could argue that this is also a horror novel. Now, granted, it's not a slasher. It's not horror in the vein of Stephen King or of Clive Barker. Chuck's got his very own flavor of horror that he adheres to. Let's go ahead and dive right into the plot then. Carl Streeter, a middle-aged journalist with a tragic past, has discovered a culling song while researching sudden infant death syndrome. This song is a short, obscure lullaby that, when recited, even thought to completion, someone dies. Such a song could end the world if it became common knowledge, and he learns of at least 500 copies in print. Carl and a small group of unusual characters travel the country to destroy every copy they can find, hopefully before some power-hungry maniac discovers the lullaby's deadly effect. This book is written first-person, non-linear in the present tense. Chuck's trademark style shows up here. In every single one of his books that I've had the chance to read so far, it's very distinctly Palahniuk-flavored, if you will. He's marked his territory very well with the exact style. If you've read one book, you know pretty much exactly what the next book is going to read like, even though it will be different, even though there'll be new characters, new plot, you know how it's going to be delivered to you. Chuck will tell you a different story every time, but he's going to tell it almost exactly the same way every time. Does it work? It really depends on the book. In this instance, I would argue that it does. Chuck likes to use lots of mnemonic motifs as well. He will repeat the same phrase or very similar phrasing many times throughout the book. He will return to it time and time again. A lot of readers can find that tiresome, and I would find that tiresome if Chuck's books weren't all pretty short in general. In the worst of his books, the mnemonic repetition can be kind of gimmicky, and it does feel a bit like a gimmick, but again, in this book specifically, didn't feel like it was too much. One thing that is interesting about it is that the narrator, again this is written first person here, the narrator never gives himself quotations when he's speaking with other characters. Other characters get quotations for their exact dialogue, and I do feel like we are given exact dialogue in some instances, for the narrator, but he still never gives himself quotation marks. This ties into his character. He really values silence. Because he knows the culling song, he very much so values silence. And it's really interesting to see that reflected in the narration itself. The tone of the book is pretty overwhelmingly nihilistic, generally speaking, but that's Chuck Palahniuk for you. What was Chuck's most nihilistic book? All of them. I would say that Chuck's books feel like they are drenched in ennui. There is no there's no satisfaction with any kind of modern life. Now, I'm not saying that, he needs to be satisfied. That's just what he's pointing out, that he is deeply unsatisfied. Chuck's characters, while they're always unique in their occupations and their names and, their origins, where they come from, so on and so forth, because of Chuck's adherence to his style, they all end up kind of casting the same shadow. They all kind of feel the same. It really feels like he writes to capture hyper-specific moods, and he doesn't really stray too much from that, and therefore that kind of limits the range of the characters, what they can really do. Sometimes that works to his benefit, sometimes it doesn't. Here, in this book, it generally does. The main character is Carl Streeter. He's our narrator. It's the guy that we get the first-person point of view from the entire book. He pretty much becomes an unintentional serial killer at the beginning of the book, just because he knows the song. It just goes through his mind occasionally, and it just kills people. And that's not good. He, obviously doesn't really like that, so that's what inspires him to want to join up with the others. We'll talk in a few moments about them. It's what inspires him to actually go out and try and destroy the copies of the song, to try and erase it from the face of the planet, right? He has a tragic past, right? He's a fairly passive protagonist, all things considered. Things just kind of happen around him, and if it weren't for the other characters, the plot wouldn't move forward. Even though he's the narrator and the main character, Carl is not really the driving force of the narrative itself. Helen Boyle is actually the character that really moves the story forward. We actually start the book talking about Helen. The prologue is about Helen herself. She's a real estate agent that happens to know the calling song, and her gimmick is selling haunted houses to people that enrich herself and stuff like that. We learn pretty early on that Helen killed her husband because her husband blamed Helen for the death of their child. And that has, had long-lasting ramifications. Generally speaking, I liked Helen as much as I could. Chuck Palahniuk's style of writing does make it particularly difficult for me to feel attached to any given one of the characters that he's done here, but for as much as I can, Helen is the character I think I liked the most. Mona is another character. She is Helen's assistant. She was my least favorite major character in the book. She just felt fairly bland compared to the rest of them. That's all I can really say, honestly. I can't feel very strongly about her one way or the other. I didn't hate her. I didn't also like her very much. So she just was, But Oyster's an interesting character. Oyster was her boyfriend. He is one of the most obnoxious characters that Chuck Palahniuk has ever written. And also, man, just an asshole. You don't like Oyster. I don't like Oyster. He is a real authoritarian leftist kind of a guy, and man, the authoritarianism just ain't too cool, man. I'm just not down for that. Oyster is very transfixed on the suffering of modern life. He's adopted an extremely, even more nihilistic point of view than anybody else, because he just hates the way everything is. Now, I can agree with a lot of his sentiment on a lot of the things that he does hate, but his reaction to them, not always the right idea. As a matter of fact, he seems kind of like a bit of a prick that would turn into a Joseph Stalin if given the chance. Let's go ahead and jump into the spoiler territory. So if you don't want any spoilers, have a good day. So let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's discuss that necrophilia. Oh boy. The protagonist, has sex with his dead wife unknowingly to him, and then there's also another character who we didn't discuss earlier, a different character named Nash, who learns of the culling song so that he can kill, supermodels and then, rape their dead bodies, which is wow, okay, Chuck, we're going there. Cool, I guess. Looking past the shock value of this, right, I kind of have no idea why he decided to include it, thematically, right? The book is about exploiting people and killing people, right? And having power over people. And so, I suppose you could argue that, necrophilia is, maybe a way to have the power over the person, but, they're already dead. They're not going to be able to, acknowledge it. Not to mention, the main character, he's not trying to have power over anybody, right? He's just immensely grief-stricken over it. I don't see a deeper thematic reason to have actually included the necrophilia to it. I mean, maybe I just lost something. I read this book at an extremely quick pace while partially distracted, so I may have just missed some shit, right? I could have just glanced over that, but, why? Why did we have to include the necrophilia? I'm not saying that you can't write about necrophilia, right? I've personally written a story about necrophilia myself. Wasn't very comfortable, but I did. If you're gonna bring up something as, directly weird and uncomfortable as necrophilia, there's kinda got to be a thematic reason for it. There were quite a number of direct allusions to 1984 by George Orwell, right? He cites Big Brother by name. But, I have one small, weird little thing that I noticed about it. Why did he go with 1984? Because he specifically several times was talking about how Big Brother was not quite the Big Brother of 1984. It was much more about the Big Brother who is loud and boisterous and in your face and trying to distract you, which, alright, fine, yeah, if that's what he wants to write about, that's cool, but, why not have chosen, Brave New World instead? That's a world that's bright and boisterous and trying to distract you and shit like that. That feels like it would have been the more direct allusion to have made, so I'm not saying that doing 1984 and Big Brother was the wrong choice here. I just think it would have been strengthened if he would have chosen a different dystopia to focus on. Perhaps the most interesting thing that Chuck has to talk about in this book is his criticism of the left-wing politics, specifically authoritarian left-wing politics. With the Oyster character, you just get this sense that if he knew the calling song, or even worse, actually got his hands on the grimoire with the rest of the spells in there, with God knows what other kind of spells are in there, right? He would very quickly as I mentioned earlier, just turn into the Stalin type. He would very quickly just become a dictator, and things would become horrible. Mass death of all different kinds, right? Not just directly because of the Culling song, but probably because of, failure to running the state. Anything else that falls behind a failed dictator state, all of those various different things would probably happen under him, because he sounds like, an authoritarian leftist. Now, the thing is, I have no problem with left-leaning policies. Left-leaning policies, as a matter of fact, I think are the right way and what we need to end up doing, because 40 years of conservatism has led us to fucking goddamn this. Oyster is a very interesting character in this book because he is an authoritarian. Everything that he points out is, ostensibly correct in what he diagnoses as the problem. The issue with Oyster is how he chooses to try to fix it. He tries to fix it like an authoritarian. It's never good to do things by force, and Oyster wants to just do things by force. He's not a student of history. He doesn't understand that authoritarianism doesn't work. It's never really worked, not on the long scale for anybody other than the authoritarian themselves. And most of the time, those authoritarians end up dying. They get overthrown or they commit suicide in their bunkers. So, shifting gears, talking about the climax of the story, the most interesting visual moment in the story happens during the climax, when Carl finds Helen in the hospital, and, there's the whole thing with her frozen baby, which is like, right? She has been chewing on all of the jewelry and shit, but she's been taken over by Oyster, right? Oyster's trying to make her commit suicide by, swallowing all of these fucking jewels that she's had throughout her, that she's got throughout the story. And at one point, she just smiles, and, she can see, a lot of her teeth have been knocked out, and, literally there's diamonds that she's been chewing on, so it's, shoved up into her gums. It's all gross and nasty, and those are really excellently done visuals there. That was the best part of the best visual that Chuck was able to pull off in this book was just her smiling in that moment. It's a very vivid impression in my mind. The actual end of the book, in that, Helen has taken over Sarge's body, and Carl and Helen / Sarge are now, trying to kill Oyster and Mona. It's kind of a happy ending. It's not exactly a happy ending, but, Carl more or less is happy with Helen. He does love her. Helen says that there is no love spell in the grimoire, so it's implied that probably, as long as she's telling the truth, Carl is actually in love with her, so he, does actually kind of get a bit of a happy ending. But that's only if we actually trust Helen, and that we believe that there is no love spell in the grimoire. If there is, well, then it's a fairly nihilistic ending. Now, granted, I'll admit that does tie in more thematically, right? Her lying about that, and there actually being a love spell, and she has just put the spell on Carl. That does thematically tie in. The optimist inside me likes the idea of, Carl actually having fallen in love with her, because, as much as life is sour and bad and horrible things happen every fucking day. I mean, good things do happen too, right? Nothing is 100% terrible. Well, okay, excuse me, there are definitely things that are 100% terrible, but life itself is not 100% terrible. If there was only terror, there would be nothing good, right? We wouldn't even have a framework of good. Terror would mean nothing if life was only terror, because that would be normal. We wouldn't have the opposite to be able to compare it to. And so in this instance, that's one of the reasons why I think that probably there is no love spell, and that Carl actually did fall in love with Helen. Granted, I wasn't super swayed with their love and all of that, because again, Chuck's very specific style makes it a little difficult for me to attach to the characters emotionally, so it was I bought it for the sake of the narrative, but feeling it was only so-so. In conclusion, I was pleasantly surprised with Lullaby. I did not expect to read it. I didn't really have it on my radar for the next thing to read, but I just picked it up at random one day when I had, just a bunch of time to kill. So I was just like, fuck it. Here's a book, fairly short. We'll see if I can't kill it today and tomorrow. And so I did. And I gotta admit, it's not the best of the books that he wrote, but I hold it very highly amongst Chuck Palahniuk books, actually. This is one of the better ones he's done, I think. This book wasn't quite great, but it was really good, so I'm gonna give it a B+. The oddball plot and peculiar characters were benefited by the book's breakneck speed, and Palahniuk's uncompromising style worked very well to convey his dissatisfaction and his criticism, even if it did get in the way occasionally. Now, am I going to reread this book? Yes, actually, I can imagine myself doing that. I'm not certain that I'm going to, but when I do get around to rereading something by Chuck, which I have not reread anything by him yet, I can imagine this would be one of the first that I could get around to. I'm definitely not going to rule it out. I would be excited to reread this book at some point, I think. My name is Damien, by the way, and I'm also an author. I wrote The Circus, an American fantasy, half of the short stories in Portraits and Bloodlines with Rick Foreman, and the stage play 666, or a play about stones and how to carry them. They're all available on my website. There's a link in the description. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you have a good day.